Number 10. Stalker on Campus. University of Utah student Lauren McCluskey was looking forward to graduation in 2019. The 21-year-old was a standout member of the university's track and field team as well as an excellent student. Little did she know that she would never get to see her graduation day. McCluskey was returning to her dorm following a night out with some classmates on the evening of October 22, 2018. She was on the phone with her mother, Jill McCluskey, who later described that her daughter had suddenly shouted, "No, no, no," and dropped the phone on the ground. Her mother was concerned that she had been involved in a car accident and kept the phone line open while her husband dialed 911. Those were the last words Lauren's mother heard from her daughter. A few minutes later, another female student picked up the phone and reported that all of Lauren's belongings were on the ground. Campus security was alerted about a suspected kidnapping in the parking lot. Lauren's body was discovered in a parked vehicle near the Medical Plaza residential hall near the school. She'd been shot to death. It was soon discovered that Lauren had been having issues with her ex-boyfriend Melvin Sean Rowland. By issues, we mean he started harassing and stalking her after she broke up with him. And the reason she broke up with him is because she found out that he was a registered sex offender. Further investigation showed that Lauren had already told campus security numerous times about Melvin, but they did nothing. Melvin was identified as the suspect, and he was convicted in 2004 on felony charges of enticing a minor and attempted forcible sexual abuse. Lauren had only dated Melvin for about a month, not knowing about his past. 2 years after the unspeakable tragedy, the president of the university, Ruth Watkins, finally admitted they made a mistake. Watkins admitted that the administration on campus did not properly handle Lauren's complaints and that her death could have been prevented. The university agreed to pay $13.5 million to Lauren's family. Number 9. The Night of Horror at Florida State University. This story, perhaps the most notorious of college massacres, is one of terror, blood, murder, and involves Ted Bundy, the famous and prolific serial killer. The nightmare began on the evening of January 15, 1978, at the Omega Chi sorority home on the Florida State University campus. Some of the Omega Chi sisters had gone out for a night and were returning home. One of the young women had just said goodnight to her date, and as she entered the rear door, she noticed a man getting ready to leave the house through the front door. This was unusual because men were not permitted past curfew and it was nearly 3 a.m., so she sought out the sorority president to report the odd incident. That's when Karen Chandler came crashing out into the hallway with a fractured jaw and arm. They could see Kathy Kleiner, Karen's roommate, sitting on her bed cross-legged with blood pouring down her chin through Karen's open room door. The young women in the corridor were terrified and dashed into each other's rooms, tearing open the doors and uncovering even more horrors. Margaret Bowman was found dead in her room, choked to death with nylon stockings, and her skull crushed by Bundy's club. Lisa Levy was killed after being bludgeoned in the same way, with one of her nipples nearly bitten off. Bundy was caught 30 days later, and during that time, the Chi Omega sisters remained terrified of further attacks. During the month Bundy was on the run, he killed another victim, a 12-year-old girl, and he was suspected of more than 36 murders by the time he was apprehended. Bundy was executed for his heinous acts 10 years after he was tried and convicted. Number 8. Ritual Kidnapping. Early in the morning of February 25, 2011, a Cornell student named George DeZunes was found unresponsive on a couch. He died a few hours later. The police were able to do a quick investigation and determined that he died following a brutal fraternity hazing ritual. George, who was going to school to become a doctor, was forced by his fraternity to drink too many shots of vodka. At the time of his death, his blood alcohol content was 0.409, which is 5 times over the legal limit. 3 of the fraternity brothers who actually kidnapped George were charged with first-degree hazing, but they were acquitted of all criminal charges. In the end, nobody really got in any trouble for what happened, although Cornell came down pretty hard on hazing and basically banned it. What's the craziest college hazing incident you've ever experienced or heard of? Tell us in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 7. Frat Boy Rage. Nick Armstrong attended Southwest Texas State University in San Marcos as a freshman. Armstrong's bid to join the Kappa Epsilon fraternity was accepted, and he gladly attended the midnight celebration. It was a typical party with plenty of beer, music, laughter, and pranks. Nick eventually landed on the sofa and fell asleep. Clint Hart, a frat member, visited the practically empty house at 3 a.m. and was surprised to see 2 young guys searching Armstrong for his wallet. They eventually departed, as did Hart, but Hart remained suspicious and turned around to see the taller of the two men dash back into the house. Hart returned to the frat house to discover Armstrong's head split in two and blood streaming and pooling around his head and torso. Hart took Armstrong to the hospital, but he never regained consciousness and died the next day. Within a day of Armstrong's death, authorities captured 21-year-old Jeremiah Wilkerson, a former UT student, with the assistance of Hart. Apparently, his rage that night resulted from being asked to leave the frat house's party. When he returned to the house, his rage prompted him to smash a baseball bat into Armstrong's sleeping head. Naturally, Wilkerson was the police department's top suspect, but before they could interview him about Armstrong's murder, Wilkerson took his own life. 6. Promising future. Avante Williams was a football player at the University of Miami who was arrested after beating up his ex-girlfriend, who was pregnant with their child at the time. Williams and his girlfriend were reportedly having an argument over him being involved with another woman. He told her he was going to leave and that when he came back, she better be gone. But when he returned and saw her still packing her items, Williams grabbed her by her hair and began throwing her around. He then threw her to the ground outside the apartment before she was able to speak with a neighbor and called 911. The victim was taken to West Kendall Hospital and treated for bruises to her arm and neck. No information was released on the condition of her unborn child. Williams was taken into custody with his bail set at $10,000. He didn't answer any questions and posted bail the next night. The University of Miami's athletics department dismissed Williams from the football program the very next day after the incident. This guy had a promising future as an athlete, but he threw it all away. Number 5. Campus Sweethearts. Yardley Love and George Hoogley were campus sweethearts at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville. Both were standout lacrosse players with bright futures ahead of them. They dated for 2 years, but Love was concerned about her boyfriend's violent tendencies, so she came to the decision to end the relationship. She knew she would be hurt, and the fact that they literally still lived next door to each other in off-campus housing must have been a concern as well. On May 3, 2010, just after 2 a.m., police got a call to investigate a disturbance at an apartment in the University Corner neighborhood of town. When they arrived, they discovered Love, who was unresponsive and pronounced dead on the spot. Detectives went next door to question Hughley, who waived his Miranda rights and quickly began describing what happened. He kicked in her locked bedroom door and stated that he grabbed Love and shook her forcefully, her head smacking against the wall behind her. Hughley was charged with Love's murder and imprisoned following his surprising and thorough confession. His jury trial began on February 6, 2012, and he was eventually found guilty of second-degree murder and grand larceny. He was sentenced to 23 years in prison. He later attempted to appeal his conviction, but the Virginia State Supreme Court denied his request in November 2014. Number 4. Overprotective mother. It's normal for a parent to want to protect their child from a bully, but this is the story of a lady whose maternal devotion turned to murder. The mother of a resident student was residing in her daughter's dorm, which was not permitted, unbeknownst to administrators at Indiana University, Purdue University, Fort Wayne. Tina Morris, the mother, had been staying there for about 2 weeks when she fatally stabbed her daughter's roommate, 22-year-old Liette Martinez. Morris claimed she murdered Martinez because she was disrespectful to her daughter. Morris pled guilty to murder on August 20th, and as part of her plea deal, other charges such as criminal murder, robbery, and auto theft were dropped. When the guilty verdict was read, both families hugged and grieved together. Number 3. Kidnapped on campus. Those who knew her would describe Eve Carson as a super student. She had a full merit scholarship to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, was studying pre-med, and even had time to serve as the student body president. That was until the early hours of March 5, 2008. Strangers broke into her home near the campus and kidnapped her. They came to a halt in front of a bank ATM and stole $1,000 cash from Carson's account. Carson was released near campus shortly before sunrise, and the kidnappers shot her multiple times in the street. Police discovered her dead at 5 a.m. that morning, noting that she had received gunshot wounds, one of which was fatal. Carson's kidnapping and murder, according to investigators, was completely random. The two suspects, Demario James Atwater and Lawrence Alvin Lovett Jr., were charged with her murder as a result of the ATM security video. They were also charged with felonious larceny, kidnapping, armed robbery, and weapons offenses. Both men pleaded guilty to most of the charges, but they worked out a plea deal that kept them from facing the death penalty. Both were convicted and are now serving life terms in a maximum security institution. Number 2, Dorm Massacre. Some kids just can't handle the pressure of college. In 2018, a Central Michigan University student made the mistake that would change his life forever. On March 18th, his parents came to the school to pick up their son for spring break, but instead of a happy family vacation, it was a nightmare. 20-year-old James Eric Davis Jr. shot his parents to death inside his dorm room and fled the scene. The day before James killed his parents, they had taken him to the hospital for a drug-related issue. James was struggling with school and growing up. A manhunt involving more than 100 police officers ensued for a day before Davis was caught. Police said cameras located in the common areas and exits of the dorm building captured James leaving, heading north and running along the train tracks. Cops said they had found pieces of bloody clothing along the tracks. It wasn't long before he was found, arrested, and charged with 2 counts of murder in the first degree. James was found fit to stand trial but pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The judge agreed and ruled he was mentally ill and did not understand his actions. The court decided to send him to a psychiatric facility where he could remain for the rest of his life. Number 1, Toxic Relationship. Katie Hall was a freshman at Millersville University. She was a good student, a passionate rugby player, and even volunteered at the local animal shelter. She was about halfway through her second semester of college when her on-again, off-again romance with Gregorio Orisieta became a source of stress. He was 20 years old and not a student at Millersville, but he spent a lot of time on campus and in Katie's dorm room. He was the jealous type, and regardless of what Katie did or didn't do, he was ready to accuse her of cheating and would constantly confront her or annoy her in different ways. Friends and family could see that Gregorio had physically abused her at least twice and that the relationship was abusive. Despite their requests for the relationship to end, Katie remained with Gregorio. The police received a call from Gregorio in the early hours of February 8, 2015. Authorities came to discover Katie battered to death in her dorm room. Gregorio was accused and charged with his girlfriend's murder and was eventually sentenced to 40 years in jail. Since Katie Hall's death, Millersville University has created initiatives to promote and educate students, as well as the rest of the community, on the hazards and signs of toxic relationships. Thanks for watching. What's the craziest college experience you ever had? Tell us about it in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.